Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the last video. I worked very hard on it, but in the beginning of the last video, I had a moment of recognition for the current Black Lives Matter protests that are still happening, and I think I would like to begin every video like this, although for this time, instead of making people aware about the Black Lives Matter protests, which are still happening, and the links to support will be in this description, I would like to bring awareness to LGBTQ plus lives. In the description of this video, I will include petitions and donation links that you can go to help LGBTQ plus lives. It is important because if you don't know, even in, I guess you'd say, developed countries like the United States, they are still some of the most marginalized people. They are often discriminated against in so many ways. Recently, they passed laws to revoke transgender health protections. That is to say, they passed laws that made it so transgender people are not protected and a medical professional can claim they do not want to work with a patient because they are transgender. And that is abhorrent because it is saying you are, genderly speaking, we are deciding to not work with you. And that's BS, to be frank. I think in relation to the last video, it's also important to acknowledge that people of color, especially Black people who are gay or trans, are one of the groups that are the most likely to be brutalized or discriminated against. So like I said, in the description of this video, I will include links to sign petitions and donate. I would really like to begin all of my videos with having like this moment to think about where we are as a society and what you can do to help at the moment, because I think being very aware and knowing what's happening in the world and trying to help people, it's just a very important value to me. And before I start the video, like before I wrap this up, I would like to say if you are listening to this, you are gay, or you are a lesbian, or you are bisexual, if you're asexual, if you're aromantic, if you're transgender, if you're gender non-binary, if you're gender queer, however you could possibly identify, you are so valid. You are 100% valid. I love you. From the pits of my heart, I love you so much. And don't let a single person on this earth try to take that validity away from you because they don't think you're real, or they don't think that it's natural, or they're, for whatever dumb reason they made up in their head because they're insecure in their own identity. Keep living, keep surviving, and I still will always love you. After that, I would like to say it's on to the video now. Thank you for listening. Hello again, it's your lovely Empress Evelyn coming back at you with another video. Hopefully this video is in time for Pride Month. I'm recording this audio on June 26th, so I think I'll be able to get it out, but you know, I do this very funny thing where I procrastinate for months on end and then I never get anything done, which I mean isn't really funny, it's just unfortunate, but that's okay. The reason I want this in time for Pride is because in this video I would like to talk about representation in my art and in media in general and why I believe it is important. Before I begin this video, I would like to make clear that I personally identify as cishet. That is to say, I identify with the gender I was assigned at birth, and I identify as being attracted to the opposite sex. And the only reason I'm clarifying that is because I do not intend to, and I do not want it to seem like I'm trying to appropriate or speak on grievances of the sexual gender minority community, nor do I want it to seem like I'm speaking for a group that I do not represent, because that is not correct to do. My only intention with this video is to speak on why I feel it's important to deviate from this common belief that the default mold is straight, white, and male, which is an unfortunate aspect to our society. And that means it's on to the video. So, as I said, I intend to talk about representation in media. And how I'm relaying this to you is through this little series I'm working on that I'm calling Watermeal's Creek. Watermeal's Creek is supposed to be a story based on, I would say, probably like 19 to 24-year-olds just finding themselves, but how that translates to a small town. The main crux of the story is the main character, Daffodil, moving into this small town after being destroyed in the cities. I'm not sure if that's quite the correct word, just because destroyed has some unfortunate implications. By destroyed, I mean sort of expecting to find all that you need when you go somewhere and then you don't. It's just kind of based on the sort of quarter life crisis I'm heading in towards right now. And as you can tell by a name like Daffodil, these characters are all based on flowers, and everything in this world is based on flowers. And one of the great things that I've been able to do with this series is world building. Like, it's been really fun to see how I can create all of these characters under the impression that they're all based on some sort of plant or flower flower or fruit or whatever, just plant material. It's also been very good for my character design. I could just look up any flower, and I would need to look up obviously the biology and where it comes from, but that would lead into how would this lend to designing a character. So it's been very helpful for that. But on to the actual topic of this video. As I mentioned in my little intro area type thing, there's often this assumption that the hero or the protagonist is a default straight white male. And while you may not necessarily believe that, it really comes to light when a protagonist in some media is not a straight white male, and people often ask, well, why did you have to do that? Often suggesting that it is considered a sort of pandering to, I guess you'd call it a leftist audience. I don't know. I guess I don't want to sound biased. I do think they come from all walks of life, but from my personal experience, it is often like, you're doing this to appeal to a sort of feminist or gay agenda. There's a great video on this by Overly Sarcastic Productions. I believe it was Red's Trope Talks on Manly Men, and she words it far better than I ever could. So I will link to that in the description, along with other links that talk about how to represent properly certain groups that you don't necessarily represent. Because I don't think that you need to necessarily cave yourself off and say, well, I can only write about straight white men. You know what I mean? I don't think you have to say, well, I can only write about characters that come from my perspective. I think that a lot of stories are stronger when they're characters that come from your perspective. But rather than just making a character and leaving it at that, I do think it's important to look into certain issues that exist when creating those characters so you don't end up with egg on your face. You know, like when people create the black best friend or the gay best friend, a lot of best friends. When I initially thought of the idea for this video, I wanted to talk more about the actual characters themselves, but I kind of shifted it towards this topic just because I felt it would be more interesting. And also the speed paint I'm doing is a group photo as opposed to like one-on-one biographies. I will just talk about my character process and linking that to, but rather I prefer to talk about my character process and how I create these characters. And then of course that linking into things like representation. And I think that's a very good video to make for Pride Month. If you'd like me to do more character descriptions, or like if you would like to know about where these characters come from, I'm open to doing that, but you just have to like leave a comment and tell me about it, and I'll be happy to make that video. I'll have to figure out what to speed paint, but I will be happy to make it. In my process of character design, a lot of designs I make are very spur of the moment. I never really plan things out. This is both in reference to the actual physical design of the character in like a character sheet and the actual content of a character and the actual content of what a character is. That isn't to say I do no revision as I continue to do art and write stories. I do like to make little notes about what the character is and certain details that I feel that it should be canon. For instance, with this series, it was started by just a random picture I drew where I was like, I want to practice on character design. Let me draw flower characters. And then it just expanded into this whole series I'm making. The original picture, I believe, was probably posted, it must have been like a year ago by now because I look at the art and it's disgusting. But it was a character based on the Humboldt lily. It was lilac and I believe sunflower. I know it wasn't daffodil, but it was some yellow flower. So like sunflower or daisy. And even in that description, I went on a rant about representation or something, which I feel could have been better worded, but that's kind of what the inspiration was for this video. So I mean, if you want to see how ideas can morph and change for the better, look right there. A good example of changes that I made spur of the moment were when I was creating the main character Daffodil, I just got the energy that she should be a gay woman. Like, I don't know how to describe it. I just designed her and I was like, yeah, she's big gay. It's not that I set out to make a lesbian. I didn't sit down and said, I'm gonna make the lesbians of lesbians, or that she even looks like what I perceive a lesbian to look like. I just decided I just want to see a gay character. Yeah, she likes girls. Not only did this lead to me thinking of very cute art ideas with her and other characters, but this also led to an interesting struggle for me. I mentioned earlier how I do not intend to appropriate struggles in this chat, but also that extends to the series Watermeal's Creek. So I'm not quite sure in like my Flowerville universe, if you want to call it, if I want to include scenes where the characters struggle with being gay or trans, not only because I feel that would be appropriative, but also I feel bad creating a universe that's kind of meant to be escapism that still has these prejudices and these biases in the world. But on that section, I also don't want to make this false reality that this doesn't happen to gay people and trans people in their life. So at the very least, I think if I were to ever make this a full-fledged series, I would like to do more research into stories about certain minorities and relate that to how the characters develop and how they struggle, because part of it is I still do want to have character development and moving past grievances that they do have in life. It's a very difficult balancing act, if you will, but I never want to say that to discourage any sort of writer who's like me, who does want to write a story. At the very least, I definitely think that if you create a dynamic and interesting character, that is a great place to start. There definitely has to be growth to be made. I really think that's the most important aspect to any character, is that they just continue to grow, which is also very fun because this is a show based on flowers and flowers grow. But of course, that's not to say I'm not going to include any of my personal experiences with grievances I have. And on the topic of some characters I just design and I think they're whatever, some characters were harder. For instance, my character Protea, I struggled with in making her character, like both in the aspect of dumb stuff like what's her star sign and what's her interests and hobbies, but also what's her character arc, what's her plan in this small town that she lives in. So it's always a growing experience figuring out, how do all of these characters interact? How do I want them to interact? What does that mean for their character arcs? Because I think I want to turn Watermeal's Creek into a very, not necessarily short, but a shorter series that's just kind of like where each character has their own individual character arc. And while of course I do want there to be struggles that they overcome, I also want this to be a very feel-good series because the world is very depressing right now. There are some choices I make for characters that are not necessarily retroactive, but I look back and I think it would be great if this character were part of this group, because I think it not only fits their characters, but it relates to mine and other struggles. So for instance, I've always had a trouble with being kind of on the edge of being neurotypical and being neurodivergent. Being neurodivergent runs in my family, and while I'm kind of on this border state where I'm still very smart and functional, I still do struggle with what you would consider things like social cues or basic common functions. It's very hard to explain if your brain does not work like that. Like some people would look at the way that I think or the way that I clean or the way that I do my work and they would say, how could you function like that? That's not how I function. I can do everything right away because I'm a good kid, and it's just hard to explain. So for this, one of my favorite headcanons that I'm almost certain I will make canon is that my character Lilium, who has the orange hair that I absolutely love to draw and design, has ADHD, and that's why his job is to be the tour guide to the town, because going outside and running around and just hiking and giving tours and talking to people is a good reliever for him to not get so wound up and get frustrated. Aside from Lilium, I also want this series to be a big focus on mental health, because part of my personal struggle has been overcoming things like being this super anxious person or having extreme bouts of depression and surviving through it and learning what you can from it. Because I know from my own personal research that while a lot of us are more aware of mental health, and I think that's great, we need to be more aware of how it affects our everyday life and even the little things in our lives that it may affect, and how it affects something as simple as how we interact with others. And I think, the Gen Z millennial sort of area is doing great to learn about that, but I think we need to keep moving past things like depression and anxiety and working even more towards an idea of what are just the little things that affect us in everyday life that you wouldn't think affect us, but they do. On that note, another great thing that I found by working on this new series, Watermeal's Creek, is just, I hesitate now to call it a great thing because it's been sad to learn how many people do not really recognize things like sexism and fat phobia and racism, classism, and ableism is a really big one. How they don't recognize those as genuine issues, or they say, why would we want to give light to those issues and not just make the main characters your typical characters? Oh, great wording, Evelyn, but you know what I mean? And it's really unfortunate because I think because this video is meant to be about representation, if I can let you all take away anything from this, it's that the reason representation is important is so people have media that they can look at and they can say, wow, that reminds me of myself. I think everyone needs to be given that opportunity. And what people don't understand is having the right representation can be great because it encourages people to go into certain industries, whether that be your typical places with underrepresentation, or in the art industry is a big one because they might make their own art and we can learn about that experience and we can learn from it as a collective and then the cycle repeats because that work might help someone feel more comfortable in their own skin. And I know a lot of people talk about the destruction that's going on in the world right now, like, oh, it's all part of this negative cycle and we rebuild. I think it's important that we look at that cycle and ask, well, why is it happening? And why can't we perpetuate a positive cycle? Regardless of all the talk that I personally don't think is political, but a lot of people think this is political, and we don't need to talk about those people because they're kind of mean on Twitter. And a big part of your message is what your intent is with saying it and what you mean when you say it. I took AP World History. I know what soapstone is. I would like to be clear that I love all of my Watermeal Creek babies regardless, because they're all beautiful and I love designing them. I hope you all like the speed paint video and watching me try to figure out what the group dynamic is. I wish I did more with the composition of the piece. I think I could have worked in a better angle with the group of characters at the table and Daffodil and Rosemary coming towards them, like try to kind of interconnect them more. I really struggled where to put Daffodil in the piece, so I was like, oh, I'll just put her next to Rosemary, which I really wish I did more with that. I think a decent amount of all of the characters' different personalities came in through the piece, at least. Like Peony's being very flirty, Protea and Lilium are being very cute together. Lilac's just in it. She likes food. She likes being outside. She's just very into culture. And Daffodil and Rosemary are just vibing. I don't want to go into too much of a ramble just because I've already been rambling about everything I've been rambling about in this video. So if you would genuinely like me to do individual pictures of each of these characters and talk more about them, I would love that. Please comment and tell me. And this is going to be shorter than the last video. I would again like to remind you to look into my description to see not only the Black Lives Matter links from last video, but also queer lives and petitions to sign, and also sexual gender minority lives and petitions and places to donate to help them. And I will most likely include education links. I know for a fact I will be including the channels I mentioned and some links to little pamphlets that talk about how to represent certain groups properly, or how to do it in a way that is not necessarily seen as appropriative or dark, if that makes sense. I'm obliged to ask you all to like, comment, and especially subscribe. Join the Empire today. Turn on notifications so you never want to miss an Empress detail, or you will be put into the gulag camp. And of course, I love you all. I love where you are. I love where you were. I love where you're going to be. I will never stop loving you. If you are very sad right now and feel like the world is falling apart, I don't blame you. Send me a direct message on my Twitter. I'll probably respond. I'm extremely lonely. I will gladly be your friend. Man, this is gonna end up with me having some weird parasocial relationships, and then I might get a stalker. That's scary. But I might get on Snapped on Investigation Discovery, though. That's kind of cool. Anyway, bye.